Have you ever had the flu where you get that nasty fever, and the only reasonable thing seems to be to pray for a quick death? Even though the title Fever Dream may suggest it, all is not as it seems in this Netflix movie. A young woman lies dying far from home. A boy sits beside her. She is not his mother. He is not her child. Together, they tell a haunting story of broken souls, an invisible threat, and the power and desperation of family. So this is a slow burn movie that is sort of a subtle horror that contains an overarching larger mystery. And also, as part of my agreement to screen this early, I have to stay away from certain plot points, which means some of this is going to be more vague than I'd prefer. The film opens with a woman being dragged along the ground with an uncertain and unsettling conversation that's taking place. And there's one thing that's said, though, that is of the utmost importance. The voices say, "Why are we seeing all of this? Because what you see, we all see." This 93-minute movie tells us the story of a young woman named Amanda who arrives in a small rural town with her daughter. And as she waits for her husband to arrive from his business dealings, she meets Carola, a neighbor who lives on a farm nearby. Now, Carola has a son named David, and when we meet him, he's quiet but also a little off. There's a loneliness that emanates from Carola, and even a sadness. She's kind of socially awkward, or maybe it's more of her forwardness that feels awkward, but she does her best to try and befriend Amanda. The interactions are quiet but friendly, and each of them convincingly portrays concern and even fear for their respective children. That fear may be more of an anxiety or worry, even though not all of it gets an explanation for part of the story. Now, the mystery portion of this is what continually drives the narrative. If that wasn't there, to just find out why the woman that we see at the very beginning is being dragged along the ground, I think you'd really be questioning why the heck you're watching. I mean, even when we get some explanations for some of the behaviors of Carola, it's still not enough to drive the story. Luckily, there are small clues as we go along that build out what took place and what is happening. Now, I enjoyed the dynamic between Carola and Amanda because it's not exactly friendly, but it's not antagonistic either. I got the sense that Carola was more outgoing and more interested in establishing a friendship than Amanda was. And this also helps to create an uneasy atmosphere that continually builds into the mystery of that opening scene. Now, the more I sat with this story, the more I did like it and how it was executed. Now, but that doesn't mean that it was a great film. I think because of the reveal and the cause of all the mystery, it can actually be a pretty big turnoff, or at least a letdown when all is said and done. For me, I liked that the story gives us clues. Now, some are obvious and some obscure, but they help guide us along the mystery. There's a conversation that happens between the woman and the person dragging her. Now, some of it is frustrating because it's almost cyclical or repetitive, but there are parts where the dialogue is directing our attention to pay attention to certain details for hints. The portion I enjoyed the most about the story is the very end. No, not that it was over, but the ambiguity of the conclusion. I mean, it provides an additional puzzle that I enjoyed mulling over. Now, I call this a horror, but it's not one in the traditional sense. There's nothing that goes bump in the night, nor are there any slashers lurking about. This is just a subtle horror in the atmosphere that's created. Once it's discovered at what's going on, the events are somewhat horrific, but I'm not sure they're overly satisfying. The characters work in this to drive the narrative and keep us engaged. Now, I was drawn to the quiet anxiety of Amanda. There is a fear that possesses her, but we're uncertain as to exactly why. She's very convincing in her distress, and I think it translates well into the story. I think the theme of grief is touched upon well in this. I'm going to be vague here, but I don't think it's examined as much as it could have been, especially given some of the circumstances. Now, grief and regret do play a role in building out some of the characters, which adds just another layer to the uneasy feeling of the story. So like I said, the pace of this is slow, and in portions it may drag a little, but for the majority, it's just patient and deliberate. I wouldn't even say that it's a building intensity. While there is tension that exists because of the mood, I didn't feel this ramping up of anxiety or dread. I mean, other than wanting to know how and why the woman at the beginning ended up in her predicament. Alright, so here's the deal. This has an effectively melancholy tone that helps to reinforce the dark feeling of the opening mystery. The actors do a great job of crafting characters that convey grief, uneasiness, even regret and anger. The mystery, while intriguing, doesn't necessarily have the payoff that feels like the journey was worth it. I do believe that the answer beyond the conclusion is worth examining, especially because a few different theories can be analyzed and debated, but it still may not resonate as much or seem worthy of the time investment. I still liked it though. There's no sex, some nudity, a bunch of profanity, and some violence. I give Fever Dream 3.5 out of 5 couches. What's a good slow burn horror or mystery that you enjoy? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.